In any kind of social debate, you have to understand that it's about the model working into the existing frame. And unfortunately, what we heard from the opening opposition is an insistence model that says society is supposed to decide on what society wants. But the problem is we're existing under a first world liberal democratic country which has recognized that in some areas society wants specific changes. And these changes have already been accommodated. Remember, in Rena's speech, he talked about the landmark movements that have been happening on the ground. The idea that we have accepted homosexual existence. The idea that we have accepted that somehow certain specific decisions can be accommodated by either a man or a woman. And in spite all of these things, the last bastion of formation is still held untouched by the state. We think that it's just right for us to just push for that last button, especially if society is already going towards that direction. So what I'm going to do in this debate is I'm going to look at the gender narratives, which is going to be analysis on 3 levels. The first is, why our policy is supposed to assist in the confirmation process of gender identification in children. The second is how this policy also improves the equity conditions of people on the ground. And lastly is in terms of how this policy supports in the active challenge of circulating education within the household. But first, let me rebut a couple of things from the other side. The first thing was this very weird argumentation of the necessity for gender roles. The way he argued this was not really an argument on necessity, but rather an argument on whether or not society wants this or society doesn't want this. Firstly, we've already proven to you that society does want it. But even if it's not a majority consensus, we think that the liberal democratic state that we're talking about, especially the United States of America, operates under some degree of secularism. So even if, for example, this is only a portion of the population that wants this to happen, we think that that's enough justification for us to move this, especially if we allow certain states to have, for example, gay civil unions and not all states having this. The second thing is that, yes, we concede, and this is going to foreshadow a bit as to what probably closing opposition will try to talk about in a while, is that we think that, yes, it will drive some families away. We think that that's the kind of burden we are willing to undertake within our policy, but we're quite confident how this policy is supposed to be more effective. Why? Firstly, because public education is a much wider medium. So even if, for example, there are private schools that might still try to insulate their children from all of these conservatism, we think that eventually they will still realize the value of public education and that there are more people in public schools than there are in private schools. So we think that the kind of cost benefit that we're giving away in this debate is obviously going on our side. The second thing is that, opposition argues that we can have, or it abridges society's freedom to mold people. We think that if this can only work if, number one, the society we're talking about is already consistently fine with everything else. But the thing is, not everyone is mature. Not everyone accepts secular values. So the debate happens in a wide array of spectrum, but the truth is we're targeting the middle people, the people who are in the gray areas, the people that can be impressioned by the state, the people that can be changed by the state, because bigots will always be bigots and we can't do anything about them anyway. The last thing is with respect to this idea of this against community beliefs. We say that yes, but education is a platform of the state, so even if you say your community has some level of artificial rights, the state is more powerful because we're talking about a platform that obviously the state funds. So if it's something that the state funds, it's obviously something that the state has power over, and rationally the state is more secular than it is religious, than it is more conservative. So even if we agree that there are certain values that we need to protect, we think that the religious and ethnic ones are far lesser as opposed to the majority values that we want to support in this particular debate. So let's first go to the first point. Why do we think our policy will assist in the confirmation process of gender identification in children? We think that this age of children, especially primary and secondary, is an age of self-discovery. An idea wherein they journey towards sexual identity, what their preferences are, and what kinds of decisions they want to create. We think that this is part of their experiences in school because most of the time children spend more time in school than they do in the household. In the status quo, when children choose to commit to a deviant act, there's a knee-jerk reaction in parents to always correct this. The problem is that this gets affirmed by the existence of schools who affirm these kinds of decisions. So what happens? We think that it aids in the contradiction process as to what kind of children we want to create. But secondly, is that removing this breakdown also removes the stigma attached with all of the other things that status quo is suffering right now. Like, it's much more easier to come out if the school agrees with you. It's much easier to come out if the state agrees with you. In the status quo, children are forced to closet, children are forced to be ridiculed or even traumatized, and in more serious cases, they even commit suicide. We think that this is the most sensitive and the most lonely times of their lives, and that if there's anybody in the country that is supposed to be on their side, it's supposed to be the state, and it's supposed to be the school, it's supposed to be the educators. We don't think that the status quo should prevail in molding these kinds of decisions, because if children are supposed to have rights, and if children are human beings, they should be supported by the state towards these decisions themselves. The thing is, they said that even if tertiary education may exist, as to what Henry said a while ago in his POI, we think the conclusion is quite simple. It might not be enough, because at some point, it might be too late. It might be an occasion wherein they've already been indoctrinated too much, and the school has already even supported the indoctrination of their parents. The second thing is this supports in the challenge of circulating education in the household. Because we think, and I think Charles is going to like this, children, as they age, are potential vehicles of values transfer in the household. They can also parent and even extend these kinds of values towards their parents who have some certain degree of preconception and bias. So we think that because our target is the middle sector, the ones that can be changed, they can change the confirmation bias of their parents, that mom and dad, choosing to be this is actually not wrong because the school, actually agrees with us. So we think that it supports in the active challenge of circulating education in the household, because these values will immediately be translated towards the parents themselves. The last thing and the most important thing is that this also improves the equity conditions. Why? Because aside from the usual economic model that says education is equated to occupation, we think that it also goes on the reverse. That when you create spaces for opportunities, when people decide, more women decide to be scientists, more women decide to enter the field of men, that this also causes a ripple effect against these kinds of opportunities as well. So sectors will realize that there is a pool of women that want to be within our business, that there are people who want to choose otherwise. So this improves the equity conditions that our state wants to have. So we think that because this debate operates under those situations, and because we think that children are human beings, that they deserve to be listened to, the state should be the one that should be moving. That's why we're proud to propose.